أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أم تقولون إن إبراهيم وإسماعيل وإسحاق ويعقوب والأسباط كانوا هودا أو نصارى قل أأنتم أعلم أم الله ومن أظلم ممن كتم شهادة عنده من الله وما الله بغافل عما تعملون تلك أمة قد خلت لها ما كسبت ولكم ما كسبتم ولا تسألون عما كانوا يعملون. So, um, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, or do you say that Abraham, Ismail, Isaac, Jacob, and the tribes were Jews and Christians? Say, do you not know better than Allah? Ah, who is more unjust than those who conceal the testimony they have from God? But Allah is not unmindful of what you do. That was a people that hath passed away, that shall reap the fruit of what they did, and ye of what you do. You shall not be asked about what they did. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of Islam for Europeans. Please like and subscribe to the channel. I do apologize, I have not made a video in some time. But I wanted to make a reaction video to Brother Dilly. As you know, he is running the Blood Brothers podcast and Five Pillars and so forth. Dilly Hussain, in his recent interviews with the far right, or I guess you could say the dissident right, he's interviewed three of these figures so far. He did Nick Griffin, Jim Dowson, and the latest interview with the infamous Mark Collette. So I'm going to give you my reaction to that, but also, I guess the questioning coming from some people in the Muslim community: should this interview have taken place at all? So, you know, first off, I want to have a few caveats regarding this. One is that if the Muslim community or Muslim communities in the UK, if they did proper research on what non-Muslim attitudes are, whether that's with white people or just non-Muslims in the UK in general, on controversial subjects like Islam, Muslims, immigration, things like that, analyzed it all, put it through a data analysis, and came up with correlations and things like that. Interviews like these wouldn't need to take place, right? As you know, Islam for Europeans, the people who hang around us on the online sphere, especially on Twitter, for years, since 2020, we were aware that these schisms existed on the right, and we were like Horton Hears a Who, trying to scream as loudly as possible to the online mega duat to, if you're not going to interview them, at least acknowledge that these differences exist. Why? Not because you want to ally with them. And I think that's an important distinction that needs to be made. At the end of the day, I don't think that, obviously, like, within the bounds of Islam, like there's certain people you shouldn't be allying with, many scholars say that you should only be quote unquote allying with fellow Muslims. So putting that as, let's keep that in mind. But, you have people who have traditions that are completely different than ours. They don't want to ally with us. And, when it comes to things like repatriation and so forth, discriminatory actions towards Muslims and everything, even just agreeing to such a conversation or a discourse is difficult in and of itself, because I'm sure there are people on both sides, of this interview that just happened, both of the interviewees, where there's a segment of their own population that is absolutely going to despise them just for having an interview such as this, right? So, Dilly is not the only one in this. So that's one thing. So, the solutions that we're proposing, you don't really need to ally or interview anybody, right? It's a very simple, feasible way of having a stronger Muslim community, while at the same time growing, an indigenous Muslim sub-community from the ground up, which at the end of the day is going to, I guess, deflate the argument, that Islam is the cause of the lowering of the demographic population of any native country. Now, having said that, if you're going to say that Dilly shouldn't have done these interviews, that he's causing harm to the Muslim community. I mean, if we're going to go down that road, then we should also cancel Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X, because Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X, they both interviewed or both conducted serious interviews with both George Lincoln Rockwell and the KKK, respectively. So what are we going to do? Are we going to cancel them? So this has gone on historically, ever since. There's always been at least some type of discourse between far right and minority groups, whether that's African Americans or Muslims. Now, in this particular case, also, Dilly lives in the UK, so and he doesn't just represent the Muslim community, but he also represents his own ethnic group. So for someone to say that it's you shouldn't have interviewed these people, um, like Dilly in particular, and his and other Muslims and other people of South Asian backgrounds, are the ones who are most affected or are going to be most affected if this particular political party gains popularity, right? So to say you shouldn't interview them when he is being affected the most by this, it's not, it's like it's basically, I don't say it's the pot calling the kettle black, but it's Dilly has a right to basically interview him, is what I'm saying. Now, does he have to agree to everything? No. But and the other thing is that, like I said, it's important to understand these schisms that exist on the right, because that is going to have an effect on how you give dawah to people. It's going to have an effect on how you, what you advocate for converts, and so on and so forth. If you just think that the right is comprised of Jordan Peterson and Tommy Robinson, you're going to get a very skewed version of what people on the right think, and then and that's going to show when you give dawah. That's going to show when you give public statements. And what you're going to basically do is unite these two factions, which is going to be really bad for the Muslim community. Why? Because, well, first of all, they're going to end up voting for the same parties. They're going to, find themselves collaborating on the same, social media networks. They'll be going to the same protests. So we don't want these two groups to be united in any way, right? And really, to think that this is going to cause harm to the Muslim community, it just goes against well, basically the Sunnah. I mean, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he gave dawah to the people of Ta'if when they were, throwing stones at him, and almost to the point it was bleeding from his sandals. He worked with certain people in the Quraysh during the boycott, who were starting to get really tired of the boycott. These people, these are the kuffar, these were the pagans from the Quraysh. These are people who were the absolute enemy and wanted to wipe Islam off the map. So that's one thing. The other thing is that, like it goes against basic psychology. I mean, in psychology, we have something called the mere exposure effect, which states that the more you're just exposed to people, as long as it's not in a negative way, the more positive attitudes you have towards that person. So not just the people that he's interviewing on the far right, but also their viewers, their viewership, those people who belong to those far right groups, they're going to, Dilly's going to have a chance to explain his side of the story, right? So, and there hasn't been an uptick in attacks on masjids since these interviews happened. No, like as far as I know, no one is going to watch this interview on the far right and go, well, I hated Muslims now, or I loved Muslims now, but now I hate them even more after this particular interview. So I'm going to go in and attack a mosque. I mean, you have Google Maps. People know where these masajid are. So this idea that like this is going to cause harm to the Muslim community, it's just it doesn't hold any water. And even if you're the kind of person that's going to vote for a Mark or a Nick Griffin, you're going to know who he is anyway. No one is watching Five Pillars. No, is a subscriber to Five Pillars, and is a member of the far right, and is unaware of these people, right? So cherubs didn't fall out of the sky after this interview happened. The universe didn't fall into utter ruin. Now, do I agree with this particular individual? No. Especially when it comes to like I guess Islam as a force that doesn't belong, or as a religion that doesn't belong in Europe. I disagree, and I think there's obviously going to be a lot of people who disagree with me there. But he himself admitted that Islam is strong, like it provides a bulwark against liberalism. We stick to our values. Um, and we have very tight knit communities. But I mean, the I think one of the giant roadblocks is that people who convert to Islam, they end up joining a Muslim community, and it's almost like they're leaving their own cultural group behind. So they're basically assimilating into another community. He made mention that white people and white teens, he thinks that a lot of them convert to Islam because he's going to find much more support. There's many mosques and many Muslim organizations, but I think what he doesn't really realize is that, and most converts, white converts such as myself, will tell you this, is that you know even though mosques are very friendly and they're very warm and welcoming, and the Muslim community is very glad to have you, um, like it's not really designed to acclimate new converts unless they want to assimilate into an existing Muslim community. Now, this is not the Muslim community's fault, um, but if there was less anger towards Islam in the Anglosphere, let's say that like the EDL and like Pegida and all these anti-Islam groups in the UK, they didn't exist, and you didn't have this kind of animosity towards Islam itself as a religion. What would happen is that the native British who've already converted already, Dilly said that like there's at least 300,000 Muslims in the UK who are white. Um, it would be a lot easier for them to collectivize because they'd be allowed to be more visible. Their parents would be like, "You want to be Muslim? Sure, that's fine." They don't have to hide their Islam from their families. And on top of that, marrying another white convert, now that prospect becomes a lot more feasible. Because instead of having two families that hate Islam, you might only have one family that has negative attitudes towards Islam and another family that's more supportive. Or, maybe they don't really like it that much, but it doesn't affect their day. So at the end of the day, it's a lot easier for these converts to sort of collectivize and gel into a sub-community. Now, I know anti-Islam sentiment is only one of many factors as to why the white British Muslims have not collectivized. Another is that, we tend to be very individualistic, and those who are more conservative are less likely to convert to Islam, even if they believe it's true, publicly, because there's like again, they don't have this kind of tight knit community, right? So yes, there are 300,000 white British Muslims in the UK, but they're not a collective. Just like the converts in Canada are not really a collective, tight knit group. If they were, then the number of the demographics in the UK because of Islam would actually increase. Let's say what the white British made up 30% of the Muslim community in the UK, right? And just naturally, the majority of those white converts would just simply marry each other, or they would stay married. You have a couple that's already Muslim. If it was Christian, they both convert to Islam as a family, and that's how you grow a an indigenous Muslim community from the ground up that incorporates the cuisine, the dress, the architecture of their ancestors, as long as it's within the limits of Islam. So um, and this is a very feasible solution, and it's a backdoor solution in that you're not like going face first into like the power structures, and getting becoming a pariah in your own country, getting your bank accounts closed, being arrested for hate speech. That brings me to my next point, in that Mark has always been the kind of person who says the quiet part loud, and that can get people into a lot of trouble. And I certainly hope it doesn't get Dilly into a lot of trouble. Um, and I know that Dilly doesn't feel exactly the same way that Mark does. I do feel that Dilly could have definitely challenged Mark more on some of these issues, and I guess we all know what I'm talking about. But at the same time, like I think Nick had a more honest take and a more like balanced take on the influence of certain groups when it comes to power structures within Western academia, government, and that it's a segment of that society. Of course, there are many people among the Bani Israel who are against what is happening in the Holy Land. They've been vehemently against it, and I know that there's many other things that we don't agree with them on, even if they're are like at the forefront of critiquing the massacres in the Holy Land. At the end of the day, they're really sticking their neck out to call out the injustices that the elites in their community are perpetrating. And like we as Muslims, I think we should fully respect that. Because as in the ayah that I quoted, um, like the people who did things in the past, who did horrible things, and in the present, the son cannot bear the sins of the father. Um, so I think we need really, even though they're a smaller segment of that particular community, and most of them are based, in the West itself, in the UK, in the United States, and Canada, you know, um, like we don't want to blanket an entire group, for the actions of the elites of that particular group. Other comments on the whole interview. I think, like Dilly's obviously going to face a lot of heat. I think that I think there's just in the UK there is so much distrust, between the Muslim community and like the native white British, especially on the right. That I don't think that they could ever ally and form any type of like political party. Um, I don't think a political solution is really in the cards. Because like the existing power structures, they don't really allow for even mainstream third parties that express mainstream views. I mean, the United States is like the perfect example. Even the Green Party in the United States, they have to get like 90,000 signatures, and pay out millions of dollars in a certain period of time just to get on the ballot in a state. And if you look at the amount of number of political parties that exist in the UK, I mean, there's just so many of them, and how one particular group is going to get even 1%, of a vote for just a member to be in the House of Lords or the House of Commons, is just well nigh too impossible. So I don't think that there's a political solution, at least not now, in 2024. Even third parties, like they're rigged, like RFK Jr. in the United States, Reform Party in the UK. I mean, if people are going to go to a protest vote, they'll go to this particular candidate or this particular party, and they'll get like 3, 4, or 5%, and then the fourth candidate will get like 1%. So it just, it's bleak. The political situation is bleak. But I do think that Dilly, again, I've been in these kinds of interviews before. Like hindsight is 2020. You're never going to be able to express everything. And Mark kind of took over the conversation. He has a tendency to, lead a conversation, and like Dilly was just kind of like didn't know where to go. Like you're kind of walking on eggshells when you're kind of addressing these topics. But in terms of involuntary repatriation, which PA, if their platform, according to their platform, they're against that. They're only talking about voluntary repatriation. Whether or not Muslims can trust them well enough to, hold their nose and vote for a party like that, I can't think of many Muslims who would do that. Even those who are, lean conservative. Just because it's like, even though they may be an honest actor at a political level, there's still like a very high anti-Islam element, within the right. And if a party like this gets into power, they might take it as carte blanche to ramp up anti-Islam sentiment in the West. And that could happen. That very well could happen. I'm not saying that it will, but I think that's a fear that's in the hearts and minds of many Muslims, even those who tend to lean on the right. Um, So, it remains to be seen. But I think overall, like I said, you don't need to conduct an interview such as this to understand the schisms that exist on the right. Um, I personally don't interview these types of people. One, because my positions are clear. I don't need to, try to gain more followers in this particular way. Um, Also, like, yeah, you could seriously get canceled. I mean, you have to be very careful about these things, especially, when you have a conventional job. Um, but in 2024, even if you're to do research on like attitudes towards Muslims and Islam in the Anglosphere, a lot of a lot of Muslims live, especially teenagers, they don't really look at data, they don't really look at research, they don't really draw inferences based on like what percentage of people think this way or that way. So even if a Muslim think tank were to do this type of research, I don't think they would listen to it. I really don't. We live in like this kind of information age where we're just being inundated with information all the time, and um, we end up taking our opinions, based on reaction videos and interviews that take place, and think, well, this one person thinks this way. This must be how like the entire group feels. And I think that's the wrong way of looking at it. But I think that's why an interview like this took place, because a lot of Muslims, up until now, were completely unaware, there's like differences of opinions on Islam and Muslims, in Europe, within the political right. So in that sense, this interview that Dilly just had and his two previous interviews, there's utility in that, just because we live in an age where social media, where we take these interviews as like as not dogma, but I think we base on what people think public opinion is. I mean, there's a lot of people who just couldn't care less either way. There's a lot of people in the Anglosphere that they just want to live their life. They don't want to hurt anybody, and like it's you're not going to see these people on social media. You're not going to see them giving interviews. But there's a large segment of the population that thinks that way. So, um, so yeah, in my conclusion, these people saying, that this interview shouldn't have happened, it's horrible, it's going to harm the Muslim community. There's just no basis for that logically. I mean, like, we haven't seen an uptick in Islamophobic attacks. We have, it's not like these political parties are going to become massively enormous just because they interviewed, like a Muslim on five pillars. It just doesn't make any sense. Um, yeah, and on a final note, like, like, yes, they can come to an agreement, in terms of, like the restabilization of the Muslim world, like to have a strong, set of Muslim countries where people don't feel the need to, like to go to the West. I think, that's a policy that a lot of people could agree with, not just, just basic non-interventionists. Um, and there's probably a lot of Muslims who in Europe who want to go back to their home countries. Um, but like, I think as Muslims, we should care about the health and well-being of all Muslims across the world. We don't want them being suffered and discriminated against at the end of the day, no matter where they are. Now, if they committed some horrible crime, absolutely, they should be punished to the full extent of the law. We don't advocate, for Muslims if they're doing wrong. Um, but the fact that we believe in that, that we care about, the Muslim Ummah as a whole, and I do care about Muslims in Europe, whether they're white or non-white. But at the same time, you can also believe that every single country and culture deserves to have their culture preserved, whether they're Muslim or not. And I don't think those two opinions are mutually exclusive. I think in the age of globalization, we're kind of living this homogenized culture where there's just no people just have no connection anymore. They've completely socially atomized. And I think Islam has a lot to offer in providing a solution to that social atomization. But I think that when you belong to a population such as ours, like as a white Muslim, our fellow white people, like it, their connection to Islam, Islam has been their historical enemy, and I would love to see, like, a collectivization of white British Muslims existing within the greater Ummah, but maintaining their own culture and having the time and space to develop that. Because that could easily provide a solution to social atomization, preservation of the cultural dress, norms, slang, and all of those wonderful things. Minus all the degeneracy. Um, but it remains to be seen, for the peoples of Europe, whether or not we can be successful in having this, sub-community or group of sub-communities that exist throughout Europe that will manage to keep our cultures alive while at the same time improving the image of Islam in the West. So that's my time for the day. Let me know what you think in the chat. I know I wasn't able to cover everything. Um, and Dilly, if you're watching, I would be willing to come on for an interview as well, inshallah. But I don't think I would be able to interview any of your three previous guests because I I have an image to maintain, and like I said, my positions are clear. Um, so that's it for today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.